Hi everyone, Stepan here. It's Monday, so we are going to continue the series on Garry Kasparov. We are still on the age of 10. We're going to have a look at his second ever recorded tournament game. He had the white pieces against Oleg Vasilchenko, who was also very young. He was born in 1960, so he was 13 at the time. Later on, he went to become an international master, so he was never really as strong as Kasparov, but when they were kids, they were both very, very strong young players. Okay, this was played in Kiev in 1973. This game is interesting theoretically, and it's interesting because it's an absolute positional masterpiece in which Kasparov just, starting move 12 or 13, just played a very good game in sort of Karpov style, completely crushed his opponent, and it was clear that he was going to win from move 15 or 20 or so, 25 moves before his opponent resigned. At a beautiful game. The opening was kind of suspicious by both players, but they were kids. So the second reason why this game is interesting is because it's a very interesting theoretical battle. After d4, d5, Kasparov plays the Tarrasch French, and his opponent plays the Guimard with knight c6, and this is very interesting. I played the Tarrasch French myself, and this is very annoying if you don't know what to do about it, because the concept of the opening for black is completely different to most other French variations, and definitely all other French Tarrasch variations. Why? Because black is blocking in his c5 pawn. He's not going to play c5. Sort of similar to the Rubinstein, but again different because the knight is on c6. And black will, because of that, go for the f6 break if he's allowed to do it. In some variations he will also play the move f5. Okay, so let's see what happens. So knight gf3 is the main move. You can also continue with c3. But after c3, you're allowing black to play the move e5, so be careful about that if you're facing the Guimard. This actually happened to me in a rapid game like 2 years ago. And now we can either take ed or de. In either case, black is supposed to be equal, and the c3 pawn isn't really useful. So instead of c3, continue with knight f3. And in this position, black's main move is of course knight to f6, and after knight f6 you play e5, black plays knight to d7. I've played this numerous times. Now bishop e2, and black's advantage in this position is that he hasn't committed to the queen side yet. He can safely open up the king side and be much quicker in doing that. In the normal closed Tarrasch lines, black is sort of playing on both sides of the board, and that makes his game slightly riskier. In the Guimard, after e takes, knight takes, and white continuing his maneuver, knight f1, knight e3, and black playing bishop e7 castles, and also after that retreating the knight and playing queen to f6, queen to g6 in some variations. Black's attacking position is very strong. Instead of that though, Mr. Vasilchenko played the move knight h6. And you can imagine that this is an extremely rare move. So knight f6 has been played 2500 times, knight h6 has been played 20 times. It's a weird move, but it's not a bad move. It's a bad move if you don't know why it's not a bad move. Okay, so here the knight wants to occupy f5. That's clear, so he would like white to advance to e5. And black would also like to play f5 if white does nothing. Why play f6 when you can play f5? So in this position, there's no need for e5. Just no need. You can play the move c3, reinforcing your center so that your knight is moved well, and black should play f5. This actually has been played in high level chess. So now ed5, ed5, bishop b5, and now this game becomes a battle that revolves around the e5 square. So you don't mind giving up your light squared bishop, even though your light squares are weak, because if you manage to weaken e5 significantly, then you should be strategically much better. So knight f7, guarding e5 and castles, and a great position for white. So c3 is a great move. Instead of that, Garry Kasparov played e5, which is imprecise, but he was 10. It's still an okay move. And this gives black what he wants. He can now play knight f5. He can also undermine the position with f6, which wasn't possible previously. So French players have to play c5 and or f6. Usually both moves are played. Bishop b5, a good move, defending d4 and e5. Bishop d7, unpinning the knight. And now bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6, and this is very common against the French. Don't be afraid to give up your light squared bishop if you can strengthen your pawn chain, especially against the Guimard and Rubinstein and positions where the bishop or the knight come to c6. And now Kasparov plays knight b3, which is a redundant move. You don't really need that. A much better setup would have been simply castles, bishop e7, b3, and then bishop b2. Okay, but knight b3. Now we have knight f7, very good move, returning the knight back home. This is one of the ideas of knight h6 in many positions, not just the Guimard French, that you are attacking the e5 pawn or square. Bishop f4, again, slightly imprecise. Castles is better. And black continues with f5, which is, again, unnecessary, not giving himself options in the center. So he's putting pressure on e5. Why release the tension? So white defends e5, and then black says, okay, I'm not going to attack it. So now the bishop can move, the knight can move. Instead of that, he should have just continued with g5, and after the bishop retreats, just g4, and starting to put pressure on the white position. Fine, white didn't castle yet, but this is still a ton of pressure and hard to play against. After f5, though, Kasparov correctly plays h4, and starting from here, this is move 10. Kasparov play wasn't perfect according to the engines, but the concepts were, and even though there were slightly better moves, everything he did was absolutely correct, and his opponent just got smothered and crushed and eventually resigned. It was a beautiful game. So watch what happens. So black develops with bishop e7. Kasparov develops his queen finally. b6, a good move, preparing bishop b7, c5, trying to break the center. c3 defending in advance. Bishop to b7, good. Okay, everything normal. And now bishop to e3. And bishop e3 is a good move because it defends c5. So this is a very good positional decision. So now c5 is again defended. 1, 2 defenders, 1, 2, 3 attackers. Bishop e3, wonderful. Queen d7. And now knight c1, allowing c5, but going for a very interesting maneuver. So with the h4 pawn, it's very hard for black to break, to do anything on the king side. It's clear that the king is not going to castle that way. If the king castles queen side, then we have a4, a5, and we can start putting pressure in the position. So in this position, white played knight c1 to be able to play either knight g3 or knight f4, and then, of course, the e6 pawn will be a terminal weakness, which after f6 is often the case in the French. So this is a very good move. And basically, with the move knight c1, Kasparov is saying you can't castle either side, or castling either side is bad. So I think Vasilchenko played a very correct decision. He decided to trade the queens off, trade some pieces off to make sure he doesn't get mated. Once you do that in the French, then the player with white usually has a lot more space. The pawn is on e5, and white should have a huge space advantage. After f6, there's also a structural weakness on e6. So bishop a6, preventing white from castling. Rook h3, very aggressive, preparing rook g3, getting the rook into play. Also defending the third rank, which could be very important. And now queen b5, and of course you have to do something. So Kasparov plays knight e2, offers a queen trade. Basically a queen trade is good for him as well. So a queen trade happens, takes, and now black safely castles queenside. Now it would make no sense for Kasparov to play a4, a5 and try to checkmate, because you have no pieces to checkmate with. Instead he plays a very good move, knight g5, and this is the start of such a positional bind which black just couldn't resist. So you're threatening the e6 pawn. There is no way to defend. If you could play knight d8, then a trade wouldn't be sensible. You'd want to chase the knight away. Unfortunately, you have to trade because there is no other way. And now, what do you take with? Of course, you take with the pawn. A great binding move. He is making h7 a weakness. He's making this bishop worse. He's preparing to lock down the structure and put pressure on the h file. This is a game. If you ask me, did Kasparov or Karpov play it? I would say Karpov, and old Karpov, like not old, but 20 years old. Very good Karpov. Rook d2 f8 makes sense, fine. G3 stopping f4 makes sense. G6 a bad move. Pawn moves weaken squares. For such a dominating position for white, this move makes things a lot easier. And he just plays rook h6. And now he made sure that the h7 pawn is never moving. By the time the bishop gets to f8, if it ever gets to f8, it will already be too late. Rook f7, rook a to h1, rook to g7. It was probably slightly better to play bishop f8 now. but okay. King to f3 and simply gets his king into play. King to d7, g4, breaking open the position. If you don't take, white is probably not going to take. He's going to play king g3. He wants to make some room for his king. So fg4, king g4, the king is getting closer. Look at this bishop. This bishop has no scope. To be honest, the e3 bishop has no scope either, but white has pressure on h7 and black doesn't. And now I'd like to invite you to pause the video and not find the move. Just, okay, black played king e8. Find the plan for white. This is a very good position and you are winning if you turn on the engine, and you are better visually because your king is better, your rooks are better, your bishop is better, and you have more space. But how do you win? Okay, so I would advise you to take a board, set up the position, and try to analyze it. Okay, so the first thing he did, he started locking down the pawn structure on the queen side. He played the move b4, which is a very good move. Now any a5, which probably could be played, you can just ignore with the move a3, or you can advance. So black played a6, stopping b5. White played a4. Now, of course, a5 or b5 are a threat again. King d7 played, and now a very good move, b5. And b5 puts the pawn on a light square. That's very important. Second most important thing, fixes the black pawns on dark squares, which means that your bishop is going to have targets if it ever gets around this way. Most importantly, this king has no entry points. Okay, look at the squares where the black king could enter the position. They are all occupied. So the black king is not entering the position. Okay, black continues with a5. Fine. Now what do you do? This is probably the toughest decision in the game, and I really like this move, and I think many of us would have a hard time finding it, especially with a 10-year-old kid. So pause the video, find a good move for white. How do you continue? Okay, Kasparov continued with c4. This pawn, if taken, it's never going to be a target. If it's not taken, then I'm just going to take on d5, and I'm going to have a passed pawn. So dc4. Now we can simply recapture with rook c1. And now look at this target on c7. This is now tough. Look at this entry point for the king. I'm going to play king e4, and I'm going to play d5. Okay, so rook e8 played by black. Rook takes c4, of course. Bishop to d8, defending c7, king f4. Okay, king f4, rook e to e7, king e4. I'm preparing to play d5. Oh, excuse me. Okay, rook e to e7, king e4, rook g to f7, rook c6. Again, fixing the pawn structure, a positional masterpiece. And ever since g6 was played, the advantage went from +1 to +4. I'm guessing, but the numbers are something like that. Rook g7, black simply has no moves. Now d5, we know what white is trying to do. This is such a slow motion kill, and black knows what's happening. He knows what white is going to do, but there's nothing he can do about it. You have to take. So ed, king d, look at the king. Rook e8, black does nothing. e6 check. What do you do? That's it. You can just resign. King c8 played, bishop d4. Where's your rook going? Rook g to g8. Rook takes h7, you drop the pawn, and you can just give up. I'm going to play bishop e5 and just win. Oh, brilliant game. So if we come back to this position, I think this is the crucial point where, of course, white is better, but how do you win? What he did, he put his pawns on light squares, fixed the black pawns on dark squares, played the most important pawn break, c4, giving his king away into the position, and then played the move d5, and that was it. I mean, this is a positional masterpiece. I hope you enjoyed the game. I hope you learned something. I think this was a very instructive middle game. For middle games where you have an advantage but you still have to win, this is a great example. And by a 10-year-old kid. Okay, thanks very much. Let me know what you think about the video. See you tomorrow and stay tuned for more chess. Bye-bye.